Hi, my name's Kelsey. I'm a writer and teacher here in Detroit, and I'm back today to give you another lesson on writing memoir. So thank you so much for joining me. This video looks a little different today. I know last time I was in front of the camera, but this time I thought rather than making you look at me, I would show you my presentation here. So if you're someone like me who maybe learns a little better by reading and following along, you've got these notes for you, and there will also be some questions and some links. So as you're after you've completed this, if you care to go back and revisit and maybe check some of these things out, try out the exercise again, you have this here for you. So thank you so much for joining me, and I apologize if there's any strange noises or if screens suddenly change or any chaos ensues. I was not successful in kicking my cats out of this room. So, so I blame my cats, and welcome to this video. So today we're going to start with the question of what is your memoir about? Anytime I start a new workshop with new writers, this is the question I ask, and it sounds really simple, but it's not always. So, of course, your memoir is about you, but what part of you? Maybe it is your entire life story. Maybe it is from your birth to 2020 as you are writing it down. Maybe the story goes back even farther to the roots of your family or the history of where you're from. One of my favorite books that does this is one that won, I think, the National Book Award last year, and that's Sarah Broom's The Yellow House, which is about her family's history in New Orleans. Highly recommend it if you haven't read it. But maybe your focus is a little narrower. Maybe you're not telling the entire story of your life, but you're focusing on one really meaningful period of time. So that could be an event. That could just be one thing that happened to you, but that changed everything forever. It could be an extraordinary trip that you went on, or someone you knew who's deeply important to you, or very famous or infamous, whatever the case may be, or a job you had that had a great impression on you or great importance in your community. And speaking of community, maybe you're exploring a piece of shared history. You see this a lot in memoirs by political figures. And of course, we're in a election year, so we're seeing all those coming back out. But yeah, maybe you're discussing your stake in something in our collective memory. But if you don't know the answer to that, to the question of what is your memoir about, that's totally okay too. If you're here figuring that out, that's great. I'm glad to have you. But I challenge you to think back of, has there been times when someone has told you, like, oh, you should write about that? Or, oh, that's so interesting about you. I'm sure that there is. So what is interesting about you? What have you been through that has been really inspiring, challenging, unique? And once we have the answer to that question, when we know what it is that we would like to write about, the question, of course, is, well, how do we get started and where do we start? At times it can be daunting because we have such an abundance of material. We have years and years and years of research into being ourselves. There's nothing that we know better. So, as experts of our own lives, telling about those lives to readers, how do we know what is essential? What are the parts of the story that we must convey, and what do we leave out? What do we feel we have to explain to the reader? What's the exposition that we need to give to anchor them securely in our experience so that we can give all the exciting events, all the character development, all the dialogue, all the amazing description, all the other stuff that goes into a great story. So how do we organize that information? We also probably have some rehearsed and summary way that we're familiar with telling this story verbally. So to tell you a little bit about me, if you haven't been in my workshop here before, it is something I often bring up. I have been working on a memoir about the death of my partner when I was 24. We were together in Flint when he passed away. I left Flint and then I moved back years later, and I moved back to take care of my sister who had a brain tumor. So when I'm telling that story to particularly someone that doesn't know me, I have a way of telling that story that I want to keep control of the story. I don't want to upset the other person. So I will, I won't go into certain details. I will always signal like, my partner Brian died, but that was a long time ago. My sister had a malignant brain tumor, but she's doing amazing now. She's had a full recovery. I'll impart those details because I want the person I'm speaking to feel comfortable. But when I'm writing the story, I can't just quickly say, oh, and my sister's doing great now, because there's not much of a story in that. We've already reached the conclusion in the beginning of the story. So how do we pull away from that and tell the story in a way that is fresh and interesting? And that can be really daunting. So for me and other people who, are writing about difficult experiences of grief, I know that it's a pretty rare thing to be a widow at 24, and that's something I want to share with people. But at the same time, to sit down and write hundreds of pages about the most difficult part of my life kind of freaks me out. And I think that's true for a lot of people, is we endure these extraordinary things, or we're part of these incredible events, but revisiting them in the solitude of writing over extended periods of time can be a little scary. So one of my favorite pieces of writing advice for organizing your thoughts, for getting started, for approaching a task that might seem pretty daunting, is this essay by Melissa Stevenson called How I Wrote My Memoir, One Note Card at a Time. We're going to look at some specific passages from this essay together, but I have the link here in case you'd like to go back and check out the whole thing, which I highly recommend. So Melissa Stevenson published a memoir a couple years ago called Driven, and it is about the suicide of her brother. So here are some things she says about getting started on a book about a difficult relationship and about someone she loved and suffered for a great deal. At a thrift store, I found a black plastic box, the kind my mother used to hold her meatloaf and tuna casserole. Handwritten on note cards, stained with soup concentrate and Worcestershire. I bought a fresh pack of 3x5 cards and wrote the title of each flash piece on a card. Then I made a list of not yet written moments I planned to tackle. mostly big traumas and little traumas. On the flip side of the cards about new pieces, I wrote details like point shoes and first period and Virginia Slims so that when I found the time to write, I'd remember what it was I meant to say. This kind of fragmented note-taking came naturally to me. My father to this day keeps blank note cards and a pen in his shirt pocket. My brother did the same. I inherited his truck when he died in August of 2000, and in it I found a slim notepad from the days in which held, in his distinct script, a few to-do lists and a prayer. One day, I drew a note card for a piece I'd not yet drafted with the word Volare on one side and blue vinyl, 8-track, and Paradise by the Dashboard Light on the other. As I wrote about the first car our family bought new off the lot in 1978, an idea came to me. I made a note card for each car my family had owned in my youth, then cards for my cars, then cards for my brother's cars, including the Ford F-150 I inherited when he died. I put the cards in chronological order, and under each car, I shuffled in the corresponding flash pieces. I finally had it, a shaping device, and a way to move the narrative forward, one car and card at a time. If I wrote about my brother's truck on the hot August day at the Athens landfill when I first climbed inside, I could describe the feel of the upholstery on the backs of my thighs and the smell of dust and motor oil and cigarette butts baking in the sun at the height of a Georgia scorcher. I could write about the truck, but when I tried to write about grief, I did a verbal faceplant. Staying focused on the details I scrawled on those cards triggered the larger feelings, gave them a target while keeping them manageable. So, Melissa Stevenson knew for years and years that she wanted to write a book about her brother, but every time she got started, it freaked her out. Writing about grief and writing about something painful that had happened and someone she missed, she knew it was important. She felt empowered to write it, but at the same time, she couldn't get started. So she devised this method that she's just described of taking a recipe box and instead of filling a notebook, just starting with the details. So I love what she says here about organizing the book by cars. As she was making that inventory, she found herself more and more coming back to the car she had, her brother had, that the family had when she was growing up. And so cars became a way to organize the book. And cars became a place to start and describe. And from them, from just describing those cars, who was driving them, where they were in time and place, from that, a story emerged instead of sitting down and very explicitly writing about her brother. So she says again, I could write about the truck, but when I tried to write about grief, I did a verbal faceplant. Staying focused on the details I scrawled on those cards triggered the larger feelings, gave them a target while keeping them manageable. So it's that word manageable that I really love, and I think it's something to really pull away from her method. So I tried that myself. And I'm showing an example from when I started to write about my sister's experience with brain cancer. When I was her caretaker, I didn't have a lot of time for myself. I knew what we were going through was important, and I knew it had something to do with me like reconciling with my own grief and my relationship to my home and all those things. I knew I wanted to write this, but at the time I didn't have the time for it, and a lot of times I didn't have the energy, and even for a while after, I didn't know where to get started. So I started doing this too, where I didn't want to lose the details. So I would write these just fragmented bits of things that when I look at um, each of these things bring back whole memories for me, whole scenes, whole days at the hospital, at her house, before and after us growing up. To look at these, for anyone else, these are just random words on a screen, but these helped me get organized and help me hold on to details so that I could jump into any of these one things and start writing not about brain cancer, not about grief, but my sister's skirt with the monkey print. So, my writing prompt for you today is write as much as you can, as fast as you can, but make that kind of an inventory for yourself. If you have the recipe cards or note cards, that's awesome. If you don't, I don't either. Notebook paper or your preferred word processor will totally do. But if you think about what you want to write about, like I asked at the beginning of class, that time in your life, that relationship, whatever it is, what are the things that come to mind? Not the feeling, not the importance, not what you want the reader to take away, but just what is the stuff? What's in your story? It's probably not a Steely Dan album or a skirt with monkeys on it or red lipstick, but what is it? What's in that story? So I encourage you to do this in your own time. Take maybe 5-10 minutes and just start jotting those things down. And when you've done that, just go back and take one thing from that list and start there. So if I'm talking about that skirt with the monkey print, I would talk about before my sister's diagnosis. It was the Christmas season of 2017. The last time before all that I went shopping with her and my mom, we went to the mall and my sister bought this skirt that had little like spider monkeys on it. And so it was like, for me, it's the memory of the last time before everything changed. So I would start there. I'm not writing about all the fear and anxiety of my sister's illness or how much I love her. I'm just describing a trip to the mall during the Christmas season and my sister trying on a strange skirt. So again, picking something from your list, describe it. What does it mean to you? Where does it take you? I'm going to leave you with a couple examples today of memoirs that I think utilize this sort of idea of, in the way that Melissa Stevenson organized her memoir by cars. These are memoirs that organize themselves in different ways. So Rob Sheffield's Love is a Mixtape is about his marriage, his wife who passed away very suddenly when they were in their 30s, and he organizes the memoir by songs. Each chapter begins with a different playlist of songs that were meaningful at the time of his life that he's going to be describing. Elizabeth Alexander's The Light of the World, also a memoir about losing a partner. her partner in this case was an artist and a chef. And so the beginning of the memoir is organized around kind of recipes and food, and remembering him that way through his excellence in the kitchen. Bridget Davis, The World According to Fannie Davis, which I just finished reading, and I also highly recommend. Amazing glimpse into Detroit in the 60s and 70s. It's a non-traditional memoir because it's not so much the writer's direct experience, but her memories of her relationship with her mother. So it's a portrait of her mother rather than a self-portrait, and much of it is organized around one issue, which in her case is gambling. Her mother was a numbers runner. So thank you so much for joining for me. We got through the whole video without my cat jumping on the keyboard. So I'm feeling really good, and I'm excited to see what writing you come up with. Thank you.